But thanks for coming on. I really
Of
appreciate it.
course. Yeah, thanks for
Uh,
having me. I really appreciate it.
would you mind telling everybody what your book is about?
Absolutely. Yeah. Here for it is a memoir and essays. It's they're all humorous essays. I really admire Samantha Irby. I really admire David Rakoff and David Sedaris. And so it's very the essays are in that style. They are all about different positions of feeling like an other, feeling like you don't belong. So it's I talk about growing up lower income, black, gay. And we grew up conservative Christian, and I went to a school that was largely Jewish, and so just places where I felt like I didn't belong, and figuring out what belonging means. I originally wanted to call it "Belonging" by Michelle Obama, but that title apparently was already taken, so that's a little weird. But yeah, the essays go from moments throughout childhood, big consequential moments in life, and then like small weird little moments, like awkwardly trying to like stay out of like be a wallflower at a party and accidentally catching on fire. Like so like it really runs the gamut. And it goes through adulthood. It goes through right after the 2016 election.
Wow. And you had another title that you threw in here, but I don't want to repeat it because I feel like it's like, do you remember you said there was another
I
title?
did, yeah. So I originally wanted to call the book "Why Bother," which was not it was right around the time that Hillary Clinton's book "What Happened" came out, and I was really fascinated by the idea that like you could pose a question that maybe was a statement, maybe was a question. And for me, like why bother kind of encapsulated the spirit of the book, which is sort of like why bother to get out of bed in the morning? Why bother to try to make the world a better place? Why bother to try to feel like you belong? And of course, it would have been a harder sell, a book called Why Bother? But I do feel like, particularly in this moment, I didn't write it for this weird, strange moment that we're in, but I think that spirit still carries through. Like, why are we trying to reach each other still? Why are we trying to make our mark in the world? Why are we trying to speak truth to power? And I think it's because we feel like there must be something better on the other side, and that's what the book is about: figuring out what's on the other side, or at the end of the book, or behind the next page.
I hope there's something good
I
behind
hope
this
so
next stage of
too.
life. I'm like, I just like made this custom candle and it's called Next Chapter, Please, because
Yeah,
like I'm ready to like turn the page. That was actually my husband who came up with it, but I'm like, next chapter. I'm done with this anyway.
I feel it.
So I know your essays are fantastic and you have so many of them on L.com and they're funny and just awesome. How did you decide, like, did you write these essays for this book or did you have some of these essays? How did you decide to make it a whole book? Like, what was the process? What was your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so for years I had been involved with like live storytelling shows like The Moth, which is another great podcast, or an organization called First Person Arts in Philadelphia. And so I had started just sort of telling stories from my life and figuring out like what a narrative arc inside of these stories was. Um, and then I'd done a couple of like evening length solo shows where it was like 3 or 4 stories stuck together. But I hadn't written any of the essays as if they were formal essays until my agent and I started talking about like what a book might look like. And the reason that I chose this avenue as opposed to writing fiction or writing a book of essays that or another kind of nonfiction book was that I felt like the things that were most consequential to me when I was coming up, and even now as an adult, like the books that really shook my worldview were people's stories told honestly and vulnerably, and sometimes humorously, and sometimes not. And so I really endeavored to figure out how to put my life into essays and figure out how to make it funny, even though there are a lot of moments that aren't funny, which I felt like was a fun challenge. For any writer to say like, I'm going to write my life story and I'm going to write it humorously, and I'm going to figure out what the joke is. I mean, like either you're telling the cosmic joke or the cosmos is telling the joke on you. So I'm like, well, let me beat the cosmos to the punch.
Well, I love the tone of it because it feels like you are just talking to me as I read it. It just feels like I'm listening to you talk. Like your voice is so clear. It's really funny and
Oh,
awesome.
thank you.
Um, and I want to hear more about how so you had a viral Facebook post that
Yeah.
ended up getting you to your job and your whole career and everything. And when you wrote about it, you said pivoting to writing full time 7 months after a viral Facebook post scored me a plum freelance gig. I found that I had reached a point at which the facts no longer made sense in the narrative of my life.
I mean, it's true. It's like if I was writing my life, and I'll tell you how, I'll tell you how it happened in a second. Like, but I feel like if I was writing my life story as like fiction, as a novel, people would say like, "Oh, this happened. This was a little too easy. This is a little too," it's kind of like how Carrie on Sex and the City, she writes like one column a week, and she can afford to live alone in New York City and go drinking every night. Just not realistic. Seems fake. But yeah, I was working at a community center as the program director for a little while, and I used Facebook just like we all do to update about my day and things I'd read and seen. And I wrote this Facebook post one Saturday morning about this picture of Barack Obama, Enrique Peña Nieto, and Justin Trudeau. And they were striding down this red carpet, and they just looked so good. Like, it looked like a movie poster. I was like, I feel weird about like thirsting after world leaders, but like, whatever. This is where we are. And so I wrote about that. And it was just like, a couple hundred words on Facebook. And it went super viral. Something like 65,000 likes and 17,000 shares. And so my former editor at Elle.com, the site director, Leah Chernikoff, saw the post, and she sent me a message and was like, "Do you want to do something like this every day?" Which is ridiculous. It's like Cinderella. It's like, "Oh, welcome to your new life." I feel like Annie walking into Daddy Warbucks' house. I was like, yeah, things that were happening in that moment, and things kept going viral, and people really started responding to the column. And then after the election, I wrote about all the things that were changing in the world. And I also read about Representative Maxine Waters a number of times. And that's where a lot of people know me from. The columns I wrote about her went like super viral, and people really glommed onto them because she's a phenomenal person and a phenomenal leader. She has a unique voice, and it really sort of dovetailed with the kind of writing that I like to do. So now I write the column every day. I've also, it's harder to write humor about the news at a time like this. So there are there's a lot of thought that goes into it, a lot of conversation, and I also am supplementing that by also I'm writing a new series for Elle where I look back at different genres of classic movies through the lens of our current moment of isolation. So, for instance, I wrote about rom-coms a couple weeks ago because a lot of rom-coms are about being isolated and trying to reach out to people through unique means. And so you find that there's a lot of applicability in movies that came out 30 years ago to this current moment where we're all like zooming at our relatives.
It is so crazy that we've ended up here. In your latest, or maybe it's not your latest, in the one I read most recently this morning, you wrote one about how handshakes are no longer the thing, right? Which Dr. Fauci, anyway,
Yeah.
has said, and you were so funny too about like how that's now the authority and like how we shouldn't even listen and like so funny. Anyway, you said trend alert, handshakes are over, baby. And then you suggest some other solutions to greeting people physically or whatever. And you said you could find it. Like I want to find it myself. I need help.
I know. It's wild. And it's so easy. It's so easy for me to sort of like spiral or get like just really wound up. But I think a lot of times um, I look for the absurdity and the places where absurdity is just truly absurd and not malicious. There's a lot of things that I personally feel like some of the people in charge are doing that are like absolutely malicious, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do about this. But some things are just ridiculous. And so when you break it down, I mean, I also feel like I wake up every morning in this house and I'm like, I'm not allowed to leave my house. That's ridiculous. And I don't know what to do with that. And I'm like, all right, well, let me just figure out how to make it funny. And for me, that's like, it's taking the granular, the little pieces of it, and blowing them up to like huge proportions. So with handshaking, yeah, it definitely makes sense that maybe we don't ever handshake again. That seems a little deranged, but whatever. This is the world we live in. But I asked myself, okay, well then, like, if I can ignore the big point, which is like, oh, it's not safe to handshake, and look at the granular point, which is like, well, how will I know we're meeting if we're not shaking hands, you know? And I'm like, well, I'll just boop everybody right on the nose and then do the Harlem Shake, and that's the way that we greet each other. Like today, for instance, I'm thinking about writing about the post office. And how there's just the post office is in danger of becoming insolvent, which is strange because like now we have to like do a GoFundMe for the concept of mail. That feels not beyond my purview. Like I didn't sign up for this as a human adult in America. I'm like, no, no, no. I just want to put a little stamp on things and say, see you never. But you know, that's we live in absurd times. But every time is absurd, I guess.
Have you seen the Jerry Seinfeld routine about the post office from his
No, I don't think
stand-up show?
so.
Oh my gosh, go find it online after we get off, and you will laugh so hard. But
Oh yes,
it's
excellent.
so funny about how they might have to raise it by 1 penny, and then he's like, "What's a penny? Who even has a
Yeah.
penny?" So anyway, I won't do it justice. I can't embarrass myself, but it's very funny. So use that as inspiration for your post office column.
Awesome.
I want to go back, if you don't mind, to your feeling, the sort of feeling left out part of the book, because that was, I know you make light of all of it all the time, but the poignancy to that sort of stayed with me also. And you had a quote about how uh, you said, I knew I was not the same as my classmates, but I was compelled to believe that my options were just as promising. Demographically, I, a black male growing up in West Baltimore, didn't have great odds, but inside the bubble, even statistics seemed to work differently. And you talked about going to all these bar and bat mitzvahs, fancy places, and riding horses, and also how your family was struggling financially in part because your parents sent you and your brothers to private school. So I just wanted to know, like, did you feel guilty about that? Like, how did you feel about this whole piece of your life?
Well, you know, it's amazing. You know, my parents worked really hard to teach an inherent sense of worth to me and to my brothers, and which the world was never going to teach us. And the world doesn't teach most people worth. You know, there's a million ways that we can feel unworthy. Um, and so, like the idea that we were worthy of these things, these educational experiences, even these sacrifices, really came up like butted heads with the reality that when I started to realize that, like, when they were paying for me to go to school, that meant they couldn't buy new clothes for a decade, which is true. My parents didn't buy clothes for a decade. They couldn't afford to go on vacation. They couldn't afford, sometimes food was like, you know, we were never hungry, but like sometimes figuring out the food budget became an issue. And so as I became more aware as a preteen and teenager, I did feel really guilty. Because, you know, as a child, you feel also powerless. You're like, I'm glad that you're uh, like giving me these things, you know, and like I think I deserve it. I'm a human. I want things. I want a mail service, and I want food, and I want to go to all my friends' bar and bat mitzvahs. But also, like you start to understand how it works, what the reality of being a human in a society is, which means that you owe things to other people. And so one of the things that I continue to struggle with as an adult is like the idea of how do you ever repay your parents for what they've given you? And I don't have an answer for that. I wrote a whole book about how they're great, which people should buy so that I can take them on vacation when I can see them again. But yeah, there's no way you can never tell. I think a parent really what they did for you, and maybe that's the beauty, that's the paradoxical beauty of the whole thing, that because it's so great, it's inexpressible. And so then you don't, like, so words fail and you don't need to say anything. And we're just sitting here being good to each other and being appreciative of each other's presence. That's the best way I can think of it.
Oh, I love that. As a parent, that's awesome to hear. How is your, like, are you Zooming with your family and everything? Are you staying in touch and everything?
Yeah, yeah. We're doing like, you know, we were Zooming. My parents FaceTimed me the other day without warning, which is like that's a gangster move. Because I was just like sitting watching TV and I didn't have a shirt on. All of a sudden, they're like their faces are on the screen. I was like, oh, excuse me, 1 second. I'm like in my house. but yeah, we're Zooming. We did like a big family FaceTime, which is kind of nice. I have a brother who lives in the South, and the rest of the family is here in Maryland. And so we don't get to see them as much. And so it actually, we're seeing each other more now because of Zooming and FaceTime and all that. So there's the positive part of it.
That's awesome. And so what do you have coming up next? You're going to keep doing your L column, I'm assuming.
Yep, going to keep doing my L column until they turn the lights off on me, and they can't do it because I live in my house. Um, and I have another book coming out in September that I co-wrote with Helena Andrews Dyer. It's called Reclaiming Her Time. It's about the work and wit and wisdom of Representative Maxine Waters. So that'll be a really fun book, really gorgeous book. Really, it's a great gift, and you learn a lot about Maxine or Representative Waters. I got a little casual there for a second.
I won't tell.
And yeah, I have some other larger projects in the works. I don't sort of know what's going to become of them or when they'll ever see the light of day. But yeah, I write all the time. I write plays, I write books, and then I write my column. So I sort of like I sit down and I'm just like, what medium are we in today? But yeah, the next thing to look for is Reclaiming Her Time, the book about Maxine Waters.
Very cool. By the way, I just have to say that outside my window, the mail truck just pulled up as the perfect sort of coda to our conversation. But anyway, do you have any advice to aspiring authors?
Absolutely. I mean, I loved Christy's advice about knowing that it's a business. And, I read Courtney Mom's book before and after the book deal, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Also, there's another book called, I can't remember the title of it. So erase. But I think it's also equally important to sort of really dive into what is at the core of your voice as a writer. And for me, that means constantly reading writers whose voices I admire and whose voices are like mine and different from mine. And then also really like reading your own work as if you were doing a literary study in college of somebody else's work and sort of examining how it's put together, how it's constructed, what things work, what things don't work. And treating it like a business, but also like you are refining like an artisanal craft. Like you are making artisanal goat cheese. That's my advice.
Okay, maybe from now on, anytime I try to write, I'll put some smelly cheeses around and I'll, channel
Absolutely.
that.
Smelly cheeses definitely help.
Who knew? I mean, you never know when you ask this question what people will say, and this is perfect. Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much. I'm glad we finally got a chance to speak, and your book was great and funny and awesome, and it's just what people need right now. So, so everybody go get here for it.
Thank you
or
so much.
how to
Zibby.
save your soul in America.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.